Hi guys, it's your host here, Geni Cor, with House of Impact podcast. I hope that this episode helps you heal, grow, expand, and become 1% better. If you're watching this, please subscribe and like or comment. That will mean the world. And if you're listening to this, share with someone that needs it. Let's go with the episode. Hanalei, welcome to House of Impact podcast. Okay, let me see if I get this right. You are a fashion designer, an author, an artist, an international best-selling author and speaker, a 6-year business owner, and you just turned 17.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whoa. Okay, let's go back all the way to when you were 11 years old and you decided to start your clothing brand with I think it was $20 that you had.
Yeah.
And then you ended up turning down a $30 million investment deal at 11.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited
Thanks
to
for
be
coming.
here. Yeah. But yeah, to rewind a little bit and travel back in time, really how I started. So I started my first company when I was 11. I started an eco-friendly and sustainable fashion company. Later down the line, I was able to build that to a 6-figure brand. But originally, my story kind of all began and started was growing up. Me and my family have been traveling ever since I was 1 year old. I've lived in over 30 plus different countries. Now, as of last month, I've officially been to all 7 continents. And I've been
all 7.
Mm-hmm. We just went to Antarctica. So I've officially accomplished my life's goal, my bucket list of reaching all 7 continents before 17. So really crazy experience, but yeah, a little context for growing up. I've been raised in a family of entrepreneurs. My parents decided to leave the USA when I was 1 year old, after we lost everything in the real estate and investment crash of 07 and 08. And my parents decided instead of going back to corporate to try working online and kind of becoming the first digital nomad family as the internet started to kind of develop and become bigger. And so my entire life I was raised around entrepreneurs and a lot of people who were very self-motivated. And I remember one of the questions that inspired me to really start my company and kind of start this whole journey of where I'm at right now is actually a moment when I was 7 years old. I remember my mom asking me, what do I want to be now? Instead of the question, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I feel like that single question kind of like flicked like a light in my head. It was the first time I felt like I had permission that I could do something bigger than who I was, like I was only 7, but with knowing that I could do something now, I had the opportunity and the possibility and the belief that I could accomplish things, I didn't just have to wait until I was older. And so from there, I remember asking my mom a few years later, once I finally decided, okay, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to become. And I told her I wanted to be a fashion designer. And so I asked for about $20, and with that money, I got threads, needles, fabric, and I started sewing little keychains and telling my story of like what my dream was.
You were 11 back then?
Yes, I was around, I think this was around like 9, I think. So
you were 9 years old, and
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to grasp this because if I go back to when I was 9 years old, the only thing I was probably focused on wasn't getting enough pennies so I could go get my Pokemons and cards and all this stuff. And you just go to your mom to ask her for $20 because you wanted to start your business. That's mind blowing. How do you even knew or got to a point that obviously, yes, your parents are entrepreneurs and all that stuff, but like, how do you even know what you want at such a young age? And you've been able to now grow it and multiply it. And, you know, like, you are a very well-known international speaker. How do you know at 9 years old what you want?
Yeah, I feel like really looking back, my environment definitely supported that mindset of starting a brand or becoming an entrepreneur. I probably spent growing up more days at entrepreneurial events, watching my parents speak on stage, even me getting brought up on stage. I probably spent more days at those events than I did in my classroom. I was moving and changing, and a lot of things were shifting in my life constantly that I didn't really have a standard way of thinking growing up. I feel like my environment really supported this mindset of I could do anything. I had the opportunity. And as a 7-year-old and as a kid, we don't have a lot of fear that holds us back from, will this work? What if it doesn't happen? What if I don't have enough money? What if people don't believe in me? All of these fears that we start to gather from the world around us as like adults and teenagers, when you're that young, you really don't have that. And when you see people in your life being supported, and when you have an environment that cultivates growth and change and a desire to expand, all you can want to take in like a sponge is this idea of that I can do the same. I have that ability, you know? It's a self-belief that I remember like as a kid imagining going to space or imagining like doing all these things that as adults we start to place worry and doubts on of like, that's not possible, that's not believable. But I feel like when I was a kid, I didn't have that mindset. And so by growing up with like entrepreneurs, like my parents and other people around me, I feel like I kind of started to develop a little bit of an idea of what a business could be or what building a brand could mean. And so I took a lot of advice from those people. And with that little small investment, I started making my own little company, like selling them at school or at my parents' events, like little keychains.
Yeah.
And that's how I made my first $300 and enough to make my first like prototype of my first dress. Yeah.
Would you say that because you were really, really encouraged by your parents, by, you know, your support system, you made a name for yourself at such a young age?
Yeah. I would definitely say my environment shaped me into who I am, you know? Being able to be around other people who wanted to lift me up at a really young age. I feel like I would have, without having those people in my life, I would have never probably made those steps, you know? Without that question of, what do you want to be now? Like, I don't think I would have done anything because my environment didn't help support me to become that, you know?
I think it is very, very important, especially for, obviously I don't have a kid yet, but like, especially for parents to encourage their kids, because I remember when I was in school, I was not getting good grades because the way I was learning was different. And also I was the adopted kid in class. So obviously I was bullied for that. And I remember my parents not having conviction that I could even made it out like after high school. Yeah. So I always had to encourage myself while I was facing discouragement. So it was kind of like, it's like give and take.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes you like take more than you give. And also like, I feel that you obviously, you had a very good support system. But I do think also that because the way you were raised, the way you think and your brain, it's more, what's the word? It's like a mold. Like you've been to a lot of countries. You probably also lived or experienced uncertainty in where we're going to live, where we like, you know, settle here in Bali, but like what you've been through at such a young age is what a lot of people go through in their adult years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that your parents in the case did a great job with, this is, who do you want to be? You want to be this? Okay. Even if you fail at it, like, you just go and do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very key. How has that impacted your vision of life and success? Because you have achieved a lot in such a small period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Traveling definitely impacted a lot of how I viewed the world. I remember growing up, we would live in we would change homes and countries like every month to 3 months to 6 months. It would always be a new place. And I think by having that rapid change and exposure to new things, I really got accustomed to change. I really started to learn that this was just the way life was, and that when things failed, we picked ourselves back up and we moved forward. Because I was with my parents all the time, and they were working at home and creating their own businesses at home, I really got to see every good and every bad part, from deep uncertainty of where are we going to sleep tomorrow to like knowing what we're doing and all these big events happening, you know? There was a lot of ups and downs, and I feel like by being able to be exposed to that and see that, it made me realize like to always pick myself back up, and inspired me to know that even when you get knocked down, you can rise from that greater than before. I feel like that's a huge thing that shaped me.
There's also like something really, really interesting when I was preparing this episode, and that is that when you were just starting a clothing brand, like we're 11 years old, you got offered a $30 million investor deal for you to grow your brand, and you declined that. Were your parents supportive of that? Because sometimes, like, we talk about it too more and more, like, you need to have discernment, right? Were your parents fully supportive on an 11-year-old who turned in a $30 million investment deal? Like, that is huge.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy experience. I remember that day I had one of my first fashion shows. It was the first time I was able to show my pieces and designs, and I gave a talk kind of sharing my story. So a little bit of context before that, when I made that $20, when I took that $20 and invested that into making little keychains, selling them, making my first $300. From there, I was able to just sell that piece and have my parents help invest. They saw that I was passionate about it, so they helped supported me. Whenever I made, sold my designs, I would pay them back, and it was kind of that cycle of starting to grow a company. And I remember I realized through growing up in like third world countries and a lot of places, seeing so much waste and the impact on plastic, I started to design clothing with sustainable fashion, with sustainable materials, and trying to go against this idea of fast fashion where we use a lot of cheap materials like cotton, outsourced to places like Bangladesh, India, China to make manufacturing cheap. I realized I wanted to make my value set in helping the world rather than destroying it with what I create. So it's funny, my first studio was down the road from this place we're filming, and that was the first time I was able to bring a team in and have them stay there, have their family supported, have their food get paid, and really cultivate like a family within the people who worked for me. And so that was a lot of my values. And I remember that day I gave that talk, I had my fashion show. And afterwards, an investor came up to me kind of talking to me one-on-one about how they wanted to help grow my company, help put me on billboards, have my kind of name in lights, this dream that every designer would work towards of like be on Vogue and whatnot.
And some designers, they never achieve that.
Yeah. And it was a huge thing where I'm like, I'm only 11, but I'm already getting this deal. Like, this is so big. How could I turn this down? And I remember as I continued talking to him, he was telling me that if I wanted to do this, if I wanted my name in lights, if I wanted to be on Vogue, if I wanted to scale my company, I couldn't continue sustainability. I couldn't continue working in a small building in Bali. I would have to outsource to sweatshops. I would have to use cheaper materials to make costs more effective, you know? And I knew that when he was saying that, that wasn't the only way. And it really made me realize, what do I value? Do I want this pictured dream, like the thing that's been on my vision board like all my life? Yes. Do I really want that? Because when you're confronted with it, you actually have to ask yourself. And in that moment, I realized that my values of doing fashion sustainably and helping the earth was way more important than having my name in lights. Because if I were to accept that deal, I would be compromising everything I spoke about, everything I believed in. I would be just like another fast fashion brand.
You would not have been truth to yourself.
Yeah. And inside that felt wrong to accept it. After talking about all of these issues and then just becoming a contributor, it didn't feel right. And I remember after he talked to me, I went to my parents and I'm like, what do I do? I just got an investment deal. Like, what do I say? And I told them kind of after thinking about it, I'm like, I think I'm going to turn it down. I think I'm going to say no. And my parents, who've been supporting me, they're like, why would you do that? Yeah. This is everything we've worked for. This is everything we've helped support you become.
Especially after they hit rock bottom and had to sell everything.
Yeah. It's like seeing that opportunity to like rise back up again was very confronting. And I remember I had to like fully convince them. I'm like all that we've done, all that I've made, like I would be going against everything I believed in. And it was actually at a point where I was like, fashion was something I was really passionate about, but I wasn't sure how much I loved it and how much I really wanted to be someone who would be a public figure. Like, I didn't really want to be a celebrity or a designer.
Well, you're a public figure now, girl.
I feel like I'm a public figure, but I didn't want to have everyone see me. I was still so young. And I'm like, having everyone watch my entire life, all my mistakes, everything growing up, I'm like, do I really want that? And I think it made me realize how much I value my own time and my privacy as well as like my values, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've also said that obviously like your parents experienced failure when you were very, very, very young. You said that you're not scared of failing, but how do you develop that? Obviously, you've always, your family has always supported you. But there is something in, I don't know who said this, but there's a saying in entrepreneurship that's called pain tolerance. Your ceiling tolerance, as in like, I can only get through here. Yeah. Knowing that I might fail. But like obviously the more reps you put in, the more business you start and fail at it, then that pain tolerance, that pain ceiling gets like higher and higher and higher. Yeah. How do you manage that? Like now at 17 years old that you're more, developed in your journey.
Yeah. I think when I was a lot younger, I didn't have much fear. I just kind of went for it. And I feel like slowly over time, I've kind of developed having that fear or kind of developed being just afraid of failure, you know? I don't think with full confidence, like if I were to say I'm not afraid of failure, I would be lying to myself, you know? Like I've gotten to a point where after in the last years, like shutting down my company and taking a step back from doing fashion.
Oh, so that company is no longer.
It's still there, but I've taken a step back from working on it. During COVID, we shut down the studio here, and our workers needed to go back to their families, which was perfect during COVID. And it was the time when I actually was confronted with the same decision of what do I want to do now, you know? Because for my entire life, I had built this brand and this identity that I was a fashion designer. And so to bring back to the question of failure, I feel like I've been exposed to a lot of it with support of my family. But as I've kind of grown up and tried doing new things, I've definitely became afraid of stepping out of this identity box I've made for myself. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's something that I'm like aware of and know it's important to slowly step out of that box, but it's definitely scary. I definitely wouldn't say I'm like the only one who doesn't have fear, you know?
Yeah. Especially because when you attach your identity and who you are to, like, I'm a designer, and now I'm no longer, and like, so how do you build your identity? So you shut down that business. How do you go from there? Is there a season, I wonder, is there a season of your life that you have a little bit of an identity crisis on who am I? What am I doing? I was doing this, was working good. Now it's there. That's no longer, like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that it probably started around COVID when I couldn't speak on stage. I couldn't create any more clothing because all my workers needed to go back home. And I was at a spot where my entire childhood practically became a business. And it's kind of weird saying that now about how I was so focused on building a company that I didn't really let myself be a kid at any point.
So you don't feel you had a childhood?
I feel like I do. I've been able to take back that time, but I realized how much time I dedicated to things. And I feel like during COVID, around when I was like 13, 14, 12, like around that age, it was the first time I had to ask myself again, what do I really want? And really, take back more time to allow myself to try new things, allow myself to be afraid and not just bulldoze through that fear, you know? So yeah, during kind of my, like, I called it like, I remember calling it something weird, like my, having my midlife crisis at 13.
Yes, at 13.
You know?
Oh my gosh.
I was like, what am I supposed to do anymore? I don't have anything I'm working towards. It was strange. It was a huge point that really made me realize, like, what do I enjoy doing now? If it's not fashion, if it's not speaking, what are the things I love? And in that time, I allowed myself to try new things for the first time in years, and tried stepping out of this box I had made for myself, which was Hanalei Swan, speaker and fashion designer. I'm like, who am I outside of that? And so I started to really fall in love with creating art, becoming a writer, and trying new things that made me scared, you know?
Yeah, I think also what's important here is that you have achieved at 11, 12 to have a six-figure business, which is what a lot of people, like adults, like 30s, 20s, 40s, like they dream about. And you've been to all 7 continents, which is what a lot of people dream about. And they probably, if they are able to fulfill that, probably they're like 60 or so, 50. You've achieved already a lot. How do you keep yourself going for more at the same time? You're very young, right? Like, there's a fine balance between going for more, but also like living your life. And as you said, like you feel like you didn't have a childhood there. So how do you balance both?
Balance like my personal and my ambitions.
Well, how do you balance like have already achieved all of this to, okay, let's see what else is out there? How do you keep yourself like fired up?
Yeah, I feel like for a while I was kind of in this like lull of like, what do I do? What can I do now? Like, if I'm not this designer, if I'm not the speaker, who am I? I feel like growing up with like this built-in identity at such a point in my life where I was like fundamentally needing to change, you know, even if I didn't want it, it was like changing from childhood into a teenager, you know? And when I had this like strong identity, I feel like I didn't allow myself to. And so COVID happened, and that was the one time I kind of started stepping away from social media, started stepping away from a lot of things. And I feel like I kind of had to, like, I feel like I'm very self-motivated in the space where everyone around me is constantly working towards things. So I feel like I need to do that as well. So to find like motivation and like, sorry if I'm trailing off on the question, but
That's fine.
to kind of find my motivation, I started working on things that really made me passionate and really brought me a lot of joy, like my art, like writing. But yeah, it's strange. It's like feeling like I kind of peaked at 13 is really difficult to go from such a high to such a who am I? You know?
Yeah.
I'm like, so many people work towards this. Did I just give it all up for nothing? I realized a part of me wasn't really happy doing fashion at the time. It was something 7-year-old me was really passionate about, but I realized a few years later, 13-year-old Hanalei didn't really enjoy it as much.
Was that because, especially as kids, we flow, we change so much, so rapidly? Was that you being unhappy because you felt stuck in the business?
Yeah.
It got to a point that the business was running you instead of you running the business.
Of course, yeah.
Now you cannot get yourself out of it.
Yeah, I felt like that I'd created something so successful that if I could do anything else, I would be jeopardizing what I had worked for. And at 13 and realizing like I want to do other things, but being scared to maybe not meet the expectations of people around me who supported me, maybe not meet the expectations of my parents, you know? I felt like I began to take on bricks and bricks of pressure until I like couldn't take it anymore, you know? Like it worked. My dreams had happened. I had done it. And I was unhappy that it had actually happened, and I now didn't have the opportunity for myself to change, you know? I remember actually on stage someone asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? After I'd just given a talk about my life story and everything I'd worked towards. And they asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's next for you? And that was the first time a question had stumped me. I felt like my mind go blank, and I felt like no words could come out my mouth. And I remember, without any discussion with my parents, just saying, I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore. And I just looked to my parents who were in the audience supporting me, and they're like, what?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, it was the first time I felt like my subconscious finally spoke and said what I wanted to actually do. And I remember kind of getting off stage crying, and I'm like, I don't know what to do next, you know?
Where you say that in that season there was a part of people pleasing, especially towards your parents. I just say this because a lot of kids, we have a tendency, until we don't develop more discernment and like more judgment by ourselves, there's a part that we really, really crave to please our parents.
Yes. Yeah, no, continue, sorry.
Yeah, so we like we crave to like please our parents. And I think in your case is a slippery slope because you are raising the bar of what a 12-year-old, a 16, 15, whatever year old can do. You're just like up there. And then it's like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. How do you go from like being probably the golden kid in that sense to just, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm going crazy here? How do you go from that to sit down with your parents like, I don't want to do this, knowing that you will probably make them a bit, uncomfortable?
For sure.
To say the least.
Yeah, there was a reason why I didn't really speak about it with them, Like, I just kept on moving forward. I kept on continuing the company. And, like, I felt like I had such extreme support and love that if I were to go against that support, I would be wasting an opportunity. And I feel like for so long, I kept up this act of, I'm happy, this is what I love to do, this is what I dreamed of, that I kept on forgetting to ask myself what I really wanted, and instead just continuing to do what my parents wanted me to support me in, Because I told them I loved fashion. I told them I wanted to try being like them and be an entrepreneur and just try learning. And they supported me so heavily that I felt like I couldn't say no because I had almost too much support around me. And I never gave myself the time to like ask myself if that's what I really wanted,
How did you take care of like your mental health at that time? Again, you were very young, right? So how do you go through that?
I feel like I didn't have too many good strategies when I was younger. I feel like I took on a lot of stress, kind of seeing my environment and seeing the people around me, like the very personal lives of what it means to be an entrepreneur. There's a lot of stress that goes into relying completely on yourself. And I feel like I started to take on a lot of bad habits of criticizing myself really young. And like, if I was able to do this at 12, why at 13 do I feel like I'm doing nothing, And only recently over time I've realized like how important my mental health really is and how much I need to take care of it. I started to have a lot of anxiety around people and kind of speaking on stage. And only until it got to a bad point was I realized that I needed to find joy in my days, do what made me happy, instead of taking on the external pressure and worry onto my everyday life, So recently I've really began to prioritize like taking care of myself through things like journaling, writing, self-reflection, doing art has helped me tremendously. Starting therapy has helped me, A lot of tools like that has like really helped ground me again and realize that I can change, I can move forward, I can grow, and that these external pressures, like, I can choose whether I want to take them on or not,
It's only until we don't get to a very dark place that we actually are like, okay, what am I doing? Am I doing what I really want to do?
Yeah.
Or am I doing what people expect me to do? Especially when you have even more people relying on you. You just wake up one day and like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And like, I remember when I shut down my business, when I just stopped it, I was like, whoa, like, what am I going to do now? And like, and even people like, they start asking you, oh, so you're not doing your business anymore? Oh, you haven't posted for a month? Like, what are you doing now, girl? I was like,
yeah,
and I told him, like, I am just figuring things out.
Totally.
I need to give myself grace to figure things out. But it was so funny because for me, when I shut down my business, I felt like such a failure. And I didn't even see everything that I've done before that point.
You completely forget about it.
Yes.
It's only, I've stopped.
Yeah.
All of it's gone. It's like that chapter was crushed up into a little ball and thrown away, you know? It's like, now that you've actually stopped it, it's like, I'm just a failure now. It's so interesting.
Yeah,
I feel the same way.
Yeah, and especially like in the entrepreneur journey, it's like the only way to not fail is by not stopping.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, and this is really important, and probably you will also bring a fresh perspective on this.
Yeah.
There's a difference between stopping and knowing when to quit.
Yes, exactly. I feel that deeply.
How do you know when to quit? Especially, it's easier to quit when the business is not going good than when the business is thriving.
I think that was the biggest, like that moment I was speaking on stage and I finally said, I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore. I felt like that was my moment of knowing when I needed to stop. I had gotten to a point where mentally I was suppressing a lot of emotions that I had behind running the company. A lot of desire to change and not feeling like I could, feeling like I just needed to constantly persevere. I feel like as an entrepreneur, if you're not constantly doing something, you're a failure.
If you're not constantly surviving, fighting for your life, you're
Yeah.
just not doing anything. Yeah.
And really early on, that created a very unhealthy relationship with work. Like at 12, feeling like I needed to constantly work on new things in order to be enough, in order to continue the company. Like if I wasn't doing something, it didn't exist. And I think the moment I was asked that question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and not knowing what to say apart from, I don't know if I want to go on, that was kind of my moment of like, I think this is where I call it. I'm like, I've done a lot. I've made a big impact with a lot of people in my life. If I want to actually prioritize my mental health, if I want to prioritize my change and growth, I'm going to need to take a step back. Without me removing myself, I'm just going to be stuck in that bubble forever. You know?
You trapped yourself into your own cage that you built by yourself.
Totally.
So what came after that? Obviously, you said you found that you like to do art, but like, are you starting more businesses too? Like, how are you gonna go about it?
Yeah, so these last few years, I've really prioritized like trying to enjoy life to the fullest. And during COVID, I kind of gave myself time to be a kid. I made like a group of friends consistently for the first time in my life, because I had been changing growing up and I never had a continuous environment. And so during that time was really about trying new things, learning, allowing myself to like exist without seeing myself as a failure, you know? And so kind of my more recent projects I've been working on is prioritizing my schooling and my growth. So I want to eventually go to art school. I want to eventually like live off of my artwork. So prioritizing growing that, as well as writing. I've been an author of about 3 different books called Woman Gone Wild. And so it's been really cool to express myself in a different format than just speaking, you know, and like actually learn to write and tell my story through that way. It's really helped me, especially starting poetry and trying to learn how to tell my story or express my emotions in ways other than speaking or fashion.
What would be your perspective on people that are, I don't know, let's say late 20s, 30s, that they feel behind because they have not reached 7 figures yet, or because they just feel behind? What would be like, how do you see that? What would be your perspective on that? Because you're not behind, but you're not late, but you're early.
Yeah.
Which is very like, not seen a lot in the industry.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like for a lot of my life I felt like I was really behind. Wow. You know? And even like I can look and reflect and say, wow, like I did a lot of things when I was really young. I'm definitely not behind, but I felt like at the time I found ways to feel behind. like in my schooling, for like, because I was starting a company and moving around, I started doing homeschooling, and I saw a lot of my friends who were like moving forward and changing and growing, and I felt like I was growing so much in a different direction, but for like my education, I didn't feel like much was changing there. And so I found a way to feel guilty for being behind in that sense. I feel like that feeling of never being enough or falling behind will be something constant in our lives. We can always find reasons to make ourselves wrong. We can always find reasons to feel like a failure, you know? But it's the importance of looking at what we're doing right, looking at what we're accomplishing, and even the small wins, you know? One thing I've had to learn to teach myself is being grateful for the small accomplishments I'm able to take during the day. I might not be doing something big, but it's finding joy in the little things in life will just make life so much more enjoyable, you know?
How do you build grace when you feel behind? Like, it's also, I feel like a form of self-sabotage because like, I'm sure like you, but like a lot of entrepreneurs especially, it's like we're high achievers. We go to sleep and before we close our eyes, I'm like, oh, did I do enough today? And then it's like, but what is enough?
Yeah.
It's like there will always be things to do. But then like I also found like that is a form of self-sabotage because that indicates lack of grace and compassion. The less grace and compassion you have, the more self-sabotage, the more the gap for self-sabotaging will be, the more space it would have in your life. How do you build grace and compassion for yourself and for me like, okay, you know what? I might be behind in like school because I built business. Like how do you make yourself feel better, I guess?
Yeah. I think it's something I'm really trying to learn still. I feel like I have a lot of tendencies to compare myself to others. Like, my mom is an incredible woman.
She is.
I love her. She's amazing. She has very successful things that she's doing, and I see her constantly working, and I see her constantly moving, and she's always chasing the next big thing. And I find myself like growing up looking to my mom and being like, why can't I work as hard as her? Why can't I like do as many things as her? And those comparisons to people we find really close in our life or people we idolize, we don't realize how unhealthy those comparisons are because we're not the same people. We have our own different rhythms of growth, different rhythms of learning. And I think for me, it's really came down to when I feel overwhelmed, when I feel stressed out, when I feel like I'm not accomplishing enough, trying to shift my focus back to the things that bring me joy and light me up, you know? So during the day, if I don't feel very accomplished, I'll just try getting one little win. Like maybe I'd sketch something that makes me happy or I'd go for a walk. Yeah. Those little things start to build up, and knowing that you do have that possibility and you do have that capability to achieve those things, but knowing that that time is going to come differently for everyone. And you can't rush that, you know? You can't just like bulldoze through, otherwise you're going to hit a wall. And that's something I've really had to teach myself and I'm still learning.
Do you feel like you are the odd one out, like the one in like a million?
With like people in my life or?
With the success you've achieved, yeah.
I don't want to say that. I feel like that feels very isolating. I don't really know many people who've grown up like me, so maybe.
No, me neither. Believe me.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm not too sure. I feel like there's definitely other people who have had different trajectories in life that have came at different patterns.
I don't
know.
Because of that, are you struggling now with making friends and that are, you know, kind of like in the same wavelength? Because when you are, especially at such a young age, when you are building so much, and then you look for friends that are more like, in your age gap. They probably just start in college. They know nothing about life, nothing about, what it is to go through everything you've gone through.
Yeah.
How do you go about your social life in that aspect?
Yeah, I feel like when I was younger, it was pretty difficult. I didn't have a lot of consistent people in my life with a lot of movement. I was still a kid, so I could be extroverted and blend into different groups of people, but I found it really hard to establish a core group of people in my life. Most of my friends were adults, most of the people I associated with were adults. And so I learned how to speak like one. I learned how to present myself as one, just because my environment was people older than me. So I learned how to blend into that space. But I feel like now, over these last years, I've been able to find people that bring me a lot of joy, find a lot of people who accept me for who I am and enjoy things like I do, like art, creativity, surfing, things like that. And I found it so important to kind of separate my life from work and from like personal life, I didn't realize how important it was to
balance
separate
exists. Balance is important.
Yeah. And these last years, it's been a huge thing trying to teach myself to like give myself the weekend. No working on the weekend. No thinking about it. I've made it a rule for myself to like, no thinking about stress with the next task that needs to get done or a school assignment that needs to get done. It's just presence. If I can implement designated time for presence, whether that's alone time with myself painting or spending time with my friends and just feeling like myself, I think for me, creating that distinction has been so crucial.
To wrap up this episode, what do you think is the one thing that made you the person that you are today? With your success, your failures, your vision, your stillness, like everything.
One thing. Wow.
There's always like one thing that's like,
I feel like that it comes back to that question of like being 7 years old and getting asked like, what do I want to be now? It's carried with me through my entire life, So it was the thing that propelled me to want to start my first company when I was really young. It's the question that came back into my mind when I was asked, where do I see myself in 5 years? I had to ask myself again, what do I want to be now? Who am I right now? What brings me joy now? Not what brings my parents joy. It's not what brought 7-year-old me joy. It's like,
it's not living for the world, but living for you. Yeah.
What is me? And like I find myself asking that question a lot. It's like, what brings me joy right now? What makes me happy? And when I ask myself that again, it's like a coming back home to who I am, I have this tendency to people please, to try fulfilling expectations, even if they're not from anyone around me, even if they're just mine. It's like, I feel like that question reminds me to break out of that tendency to just be presentable, It allows me to realize, like, what do I really value in life? What makes me happy? And I think that question will carry with me through my entire life, whether I like it or not. And it's a good reminder to just focus on the presence, focus on who you are right now,
And also it's work with what you've got, not with what you wish you had.
For sure. Yeah.
I think that this code also like carries me through life. Always work with what you've got, because sometimes the next big thing might be just in front of you if you just work with what you've got, and then the rest will follow. Hanalei, thank you so much for being in the podcast today. Highly appreciate it. If you guys like this episode and you're watching YouTube, you can subscribe. We're gonna link Hanalei's socials down below. Subscribe, follow, comment what we want to do so we can bring bigger guests for you. If you're watching this on you're listening to this on Apple, Spotify, and you think that this might help someone, please feel free to share with them. And we'll see you guys in the next episode of House of Impact podcast. Hi guys, it's your host here, Geni Cor. If you made it this far, I hope that this episode has helped you heal, grow, expand in some way. It would mean the world if you can subscribe, like, and comment, because it's gonna help the podcast grow massively. Your support means the world to me and to my team. And we're just gonna bring you better content, bigger guests. So please just support the podcast if you can. And if you think this is gonna help someone, please share it with them. I'll see you next Thursday.